So, welcome. My name is Jing Liu, Chair and Acting Chair of the Mentorship Committee. So a few things before we start. Please mute the microphone when you are not speaking to avoid any excessive background noise. If you have any questions and not sure what to ask, please type in the chat. We'll try our best to respond. If you're calling in on both the phone and the laptop, there are two icons that appear on the screen with the cell phone and then the image. Please message me the names of both. I'll make sure that to put you in the same breakout room. So today's event, we have a conversation on the profession of architecture and Black Lives Matter. It's part of the Mentorship Committee's discussion series, part 2 of the diversity, equity, inclusivity topic. Similar to the last event, we encourage everyone's active participation in conversation, especially in the breakout rooms. Looks like today we have an unexpected large amount of attendees here. So the breakout rooms will be crowded. So please be mindful to others. Please keep in mind that this is a discussion. It's not a debate. There is no win and lose. Simply an exchange of ideas and thoughts. So please listen to and respect others' points of view. We thank the AIASF sustaining sponsors for, after this introduction, we will go into a 30-minute breakout room. There are smaller discussions around specific scenarios and topics led by one panelist. And after that, we'll come back to the big room and exchange what was talked about in the smaller rooms. We're excited to have great panelists here with us today. And thanks, Roland, for championing this event. Roland now is Associate Principal in Perkins Eastman, also a long-term mentorship committee member. Roland, do you want to kick us off and introduce the panelists?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. And it's really, I'm really pleased to see that there's such an interest in this topic. And I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, we have Carol Core and she and I have worked together when we were at Chong Partners many years ago, served on many committees like ACE Mentorship Program, and she's going to take group 2 in the discussions. And you want to say anything about yourself, Carol?
Hi everybody. Carol Core. I'm with Kaiser Permanente. I've been there for about 15 years. Before that, I worked at multiple firms. A few years back, I was on the AIA San Francisco Board of Directors. Yeah, like Roland said, I like to do community service. So I've been active with ACE Mentorship over the years, and just super passionate and super happy to see so many people on this Zoom call today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Carol. And Diaro Foster is our other panelist. Diaro, you want to say something about yourself? You're on mute, Diaro. There.
Sorry about that. Just excited to get going on the conversation. I'm a designer. I've been here in the Bay Area, participating at all levels of firm life, delivering any number of great projects. And I feel like at this moment, it's great to see this many people ready to talk about Black Lives Matter and moving forward with fostering a better society through architecture. Okay,
thank you, Diaro. Rosa Sheng is our other panelist, and she's with the Smith Group. Rosa, you want to introduce yourself and give us a little bit background on yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Can you raise your voice? You seem a little muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So hi, my name is Rosa Sheng, and I'm a principal at Smith Group in San Francisco, higher ed studio leader, and also national director of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm really excited to be here for these conversations because I think we can move the needle forward, not only in representation, but also the design work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. And last but not least is Michael Willis, who, yes, I see somebody cheering for him. So Michael Willis is also in our mentorship program. Believe it or not, he leads one of the our mentorship groups. So Michael, can you give us a little, talk about yourself for a bit?
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I opened my own firm in 1988 and retired from it in 2016. It still goes on to say. I was president of the San Francisco chapter in 1995, and before and after that, I've been involved in committees, both city, national, and state. So this is a very important conversation. I'm glad to be a part of it, and I can't wait to get into the room with 1,100 other breakout room panelists.
All right, thank you very much. So I just want to thank all the panelists and their volunteers also who will be in each room from our mentorship committee. And Zandra Buccelli will be joining Carol Core in group 2. Peter Mueller will be is a volunteer with Rosa Sheng group and group number 1. And Brandon Luckett will be the volunteer for Diaro's group, number 3, and I will be the volunteer for Michael's group. It just so happens I'm actually the coach of Michael's group when they started it last year. So there's a lot of connection in our group. We know each other well. And, but you know, the thing about this whole topic, it's been really stressful for me at least, because I know it's a very sensitive issue that we face, and it's difficult to talk about some of these things because you don't want to insult anybody, you don't want to, you know, say the wrong things. And so there's been a lot of collaboration between myself and our committee with the panelists, just to get a better understanding. But like Jing was saying, I think it's more of a, we believe strongly that this is a time in our history right now that we need to be somewhat attuned to, and not to say anything about it. If 10 years from now and they say, what did you guys do for this whole period? And we don't say that we did anything, that's just not acceptable. So that's why I'm glad that it's been endorsed by the entire committee and the AIA San Francisco. And I think that the things that we're going to talk about today, we don't know. Maybe there's some suggestions, hopefully suggestions that could be made so that within our own firms or even the AIA that could be recommended for improving the situation. We know that we're not going to solve all the problems of the world today, and because it's been over 400 years, right? That this has been happening. So like Carol Core told me, it's like 400 years. So we know we're not going to solve it all in one day. So I think that we have a good variety of panelists who have background and different levels, and that they will help advise us. So like, we're going to do breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back and discuss it more and see what everybody finds out. So I think, Jane, I think we're ready to go our breakout rooms.
Yes, Roland, just give me 1 more minute to make sure everyone's in the order. And I think someone also is calling in at the moment. So I just want to include them as well.
Sure. And so when you see a little menu that comes up to say you're assigned to a certain breakout room, just accept it and you'll be moved into it right away. The breakout rooms will be about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to the big room.
We're out of the breakout room.
Wow, we're back. Okay.
Wow, they threw us out quick.
That was a 20-second warning, not a 2
Sorry,
minute.
Carol.
Okay, all right, that's it.
I guess if you're here, that means you've been booted out of your phone. What we can do is everybody in here, just about everybody's here right now, it's like. Let's start with group number 1, Rosa's group. And you want to explain, Rosa, what your question was, and then what the summary from what you gather from what you guys, your group came up with? perhaps?
Sure thing. 1 second. Okay. So our question prompt was, with the Black Lives Matter movement, what is the significance of to architecture in the built environment? And does second and third question, does design perpetuate injustice and racism? And how is injustice and racism connected to architecture, urban planning, and sustainability? Very deep thoughts, questions, right? And I have to blame myself because I typed that up. But but in the doing, I really want us to take a wider eye look at how we in our daily practices or ignorance perpetuate injustice, right? And so we had a lot of good feedback you could see in the screen here of people's responses in terms of contributing to that, and a lot of learning too. And so I'm going to read them off, and if anybody has anything to add at the end, that would be great. So rapid fire, and we'll make this available as well if people want to see that collective of things that people chatted about. So substandard living conditions, poor housing stock, lack of affordable housing, lack of support structures as well, infrastructure such as food and resources, and acknowledging that planning, the history of planning and infrastructure does affect the conditions we see today. Related to that, there is talk about redlining, and so history of segregation in literally the planning process, telling people of color where they could and could not live, and the banks not giving them loans because of it. There was a recommended resource called The Color of Law, which actually shows the various maps of redlining. And then we also talked about COVID, and if you took a COVID map to look at where the outbursts of case were happening and the highest number of cases, and overlaid that with a redlining map, you would see some really stark similarities. There was discussion of the prison system and mass incarceration and the Jim Crow era related laws to that, systemic problem of oppression. Counter to that, a group called ADPSR has a campaign against prisons and everything up the food chain, if you will, associated with mass incarceration. So holding cells at police stations, et cetera. You've heard a lot of talk about defunding police. Part of that movement is advocating for taking money away from building more prisons and actually putting that back into resource investment and community wealth building. We talked about food deserts and transportation, lack of transportation, and the focus of developers on only profit centers where people are mostly white and not speaking to clients. We also had a discussion of gentrification and the risks of placemaking. We understand placemaking to be a good thing, but when it's not taking in the true voices of the community, and it's placemaking is potentially a more damaging thing because it highlights and values safety or perceived cleaning up of areas in blight where actually there's just been a divestment of resources into a particular community. Again, and at the end of the day, displacement of those residents, in the sort of purported placemaking and making it cleaner and better, but then it's actually pushing out the people that have been historically disenfranchised to begin with. There's talk about how even in the city of San Francisco, where people are challenged with the rising costs of access to affordable housing, and that there's still a very vast difference between those that are potentially living a block or two away from each other in terms of the haves and have-nots, and the conditions of safety and access to resources being vastly different even within the city itself of San Francisco in a dense environment. And then I'm just going to speed read through some of these other ones. We talked about the root cause of it being racism, and then how do we kind of unravel the sweater of the root causes of racism, and how do we apply that as anti-racism into our design practices. And then also talked about housing and the perception of, separate but equal, but then it perpetuates inequity. Community design, how do we ask ourselves, instead of saying we versus them, change that to us? And that how do we build models of stakeholder engagement and shared governance in order to truly get all the voices that are traditionally unheard to the table of what their needs are? And how do we also celebrate public works and the jobs that are government focused in serving the public interest versus just raising the culture and architecture of perpetuating, the Starchitect and these large purses for, doing design work that is exclusively for the wealthy. And then action items is we started talking and then we got kicked out of the room, is to come up with the solutions. But that should be like part 2. We should build in another session to talk about more solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. I think what we want to do is let each group share first, and then we can hopefully have enough time to answer any questions that come up for additional information. So group number 2, Carol Core.
Hi. Yeah, we had, I think, some really great conversation. I got a bunch of sticky notes that I'm going to try to go through. So our question, our thought-provoking questions were, Black people are only 12% of the population, US population, and are not proportionately reflected in architectural firms, especially in leadership roles. What are the potential policies and practices required to change the ratios, short and long term, and what can we do to advocate to get this done? So I think Gabrielle really summed things up really well. I think she started off, she talked about focusing on sort of hiring, recruiting. Her firm has actually made a concerted effort to focus on diversity. And when they looked at the numbers, they realized that the population that's hurting the most is actually Black people. So they've been really focusing on that, and she said that even from the standpoint of winning work and losing work because of diversity, or that actually has made a difference. Let's see. We also had people talked about pipeline, whether it's internships, whether it's high school, like programs like ACE or High School Explorers to expose folks. I know NOMA has some middle school programs as well for exposure folks to get in and understand it so that they're not intimidated or really misunderstanding that it's not just all about math. Also in the, let's see, what else did we talk about for that? Oh, another area that we talked about was another path is the journeyman. In California, you can actually come out of high school, and if you work at a firm or firms, you can actually be qualified to sit for your license. So, the idea of how can we find as many paths as possible to bring people in. As part of that conversation, we talked about the idea of privilege. The architecture has for years, has always been and seems to still be seen as a place a place for sort of privilege, a profession of privilege, and how do we find not just the pathways to get people there, but also to make sure that people have the resources they need to be able to afford to go to school and have supplies and things like that. We also talked about, and one thing that Zandra actually said was that she's taught at Howard, and she was pretty surprised. Howard University, a historically Black university in Washington, D.C., and she was actually pretty surprised that it wasn't all Black school in the architecture program at this point. And let's see, another thing that we talked about was Dwight actually mentioned the idea of from the pathways, the idea of cultivating a love for architecture, honing that desire, providing exposure as well. And then we also talked about early on, Michael actually talked about when we talked about the idea of internships, and actually Michael and Tokes also talked about hiring your friends, and how do you become friends with Black people if you don't see them? So can you have happy hours at your firms so that you can actually strengthen the networks and increase exposure. Anta actually mentioned that there are quite a few Black people that are in architecture. We're all kind of all over the place, and we're kind of hidden under rocks. So I think that goes to that as well. And let's see, she also talked about, Anta also talked about the idea of, we need more mentors. If we can have that pipeline at the beginning, but what about the people who are already in it? How do you actually help to keep them networked and in the profession and moving through it so that they can move into leadership roles? I think those were a lot of the things that we spoke about. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carol. Let's move on to Diaro. Diaro, want to report what you guys that we found?
So with a strong interest of getting to the group discussion, group 3, we were supposed to discuss the significance of the words justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how each have the ability to influence representation of Black practitioners and their influence on the built environment. Our question within that, our point of discussion was, does the order of the words matter? How can we help ensure that equity, inclusion, and diversity, I'm clipping off, but how they're incorporated into the practice? Our discussion was frankly passionate, and there was a lot of emotion. I think there was a strong reaction to the words given in the prompt, the diversity, equity, justice. There was some reaction to whether or not those are strong enough words, I guess, as a rallying point or as just a statement of individual emotion. In other comments, I think the first thing that came to mind was a lot of covering of statistics, and the discussion that we had about statistics essentially had the common point of, it's been a long time. As you look at architecture and as you look back at architecture schools and programs, they've been chronically rid of Black people and people of color in general. And even further with emphasis, it has been a white dominated culture reflective of some of the issues we're talking about in broader society. It was such a charged discussion in that regard that we didn't really get into the sort of ways in which to get in and start to create pipelines and some of the things that the other groups discussed. So there's a lot of emotion here, but I think we're all eager to hear the group discussion.
Okay, thank you, Diaro. So the last group, Michael Willis. You want to give us a report, Michael, for group number 4?
Yes, I think the important aspect of this discussion was why should a firm take those steps to have an initiative for diversity, equity, and inclusion, JEDI, I believe I heard someone say, and what we discussed is things like, going to places that have these benchmarks, whether it's universities that are making an effort to say, we want to make this a part of what we teach, how we bring professionals into how we bring students into the profession. We heard um, we from some said, you know, if you travel the world, you can see how the demographic of firms helps to influence design, especially if you're designing in those communities. So it stops becoming abstract and becomes more internal because you understand the people that you're designing with and for. So inclusive. You heard from others about how hard you have to work. One of our respondents, you know, inclusive doesn't mean lower standards. They're working as hard and as anyone. It's just that it's very difficult when you can't see yourself in that. Well, and it comes up in the leadership. So that came up in a few places where the goal would be to reach the leadership level so that when you're talking about your firm, it's not just a box that you tick. It is demonstrated in who's leading your firm. One of our panelists, one of our respondents said that it was years before she saw another Black designer. From, you know, going from being in architecture school and going all the way to work. So the idea of cultivating the pipeline, that also came up from youth to high school to grade school. And I think that the phrase came up, you know, we don't need tokens. This is, that just goes without saying. People who are in this profession to build they've learning difficult things. Nobody's a token that gets to that level, but that's the concern that, you know, firms tick the box and say, oh, we hired a Black person, but getting into the leadership so that they're leading the firm seems to be critical. I saw one of our comments is get to the young people before they are intimidated or talked out of being an architect. So, and the last point before we jump to the discussion is the firms, the leadership should make space for Black and brown architects to get involved, because the work is who's leading the firm. You have to be intentional and actually go out and recruit those people into your leadership. If that's something that you say you want your firm to represent, you actually have to make some room and make it happen. So I'll leave it there, and let's get to the bigger discussion.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So we're going to open up the floor for, firstly, the other panelists to, if they have any comments to say about any of the other groups that they were not in, you're more than welcome to add in anything that you think that that is important, that you think that we should mention. So,
Can I jump in just really quickly? Because
yeah,
I think the weaving of all the topics together is important. Okay, so I did send a link out to everyone. I just wanted to highlight that it's not just focusing on the built environment and making sure that we listen to communities. It's just not enough to hire more Black people, but it's also not enough to put them into leadership, but you also have to make sure that there's a holistic plan to keeps it going, right? So it's not just the one person, one and done, or two and done. And so this example really makes me proud. It's called Society's Cage. It was actually born out of the pain of the murder of George Floyd within our firm, and then the reckoning of that pain and deep, uncomfortable conversations within the firm of how we are going to face the issues at hand, and to come in terms of our own history of, you know, racism, in terms of discrimination, et cetera, within the firm and how we were going to do better. And one of the first acts was to listen. And then there was Black designers within our firm that said, you know, we need to do something that raises awareness about what's happening in America. And so they set about designing a pavilion that actually was just an idea, but then it turned into a reality because of, again, the firm's commitment to support these Black designers and their designers in leadership positions as well, but it was their desire to not only make this design statement happen, but to make it a reality. So there was a lot of talk, you know, with the board members, et cetera, but then there was the fundraising effort. And this past Friday, this thing was actually built and fabricated, and it is currently at Washington, D.C., near the site of the protest, the March on Washington, where it is a prolific statement to and testament to design's ability to heal. You know, and so this is like this little micro blip on the screen of hope, of how the pain can be transformed into education, can be transformed into enlightenment and healing. And I think we need like 10 times like a million of this example where we support Black designers. They have the ability to make the statement and create environments that are healing, and that they get this opportunity to show their design abilities, and then therefore they get the opportunity to be promoted into leadership positions to drive this perpetuation.
It has been published, so you can see it now.
Yes, so that's the Instagram post, but you could see all the different images that people are taking photos, and people that are just walking by are posting about it. So I hope this is a good example of, yes, we can do this.
Great, thank you. Carol, you have anything you want to say that maybe you didn't get a chance earlier about any other summaries from the other groups?
No, I'm just looking forward to hearing, you know, have it open up to everybody. I think everybody's got some great ideas, and there's a lot of there's a lot of work to be done, and it just sounds like people are ready to roll up their sleeves and actually help support. I think one of the things that Anta said, the idea that there's a lot of people out there, that's one thing that I think sits with me. You know, I was literally the 100th Black licensed female architect in this country, and I've been able to maneuver my way through and get through, but you know, I can just become, I was able to kind of go under the radar and be this sort of, you know, people knew me, but almost like an invisible figure. And, you know, how do we make sure that people are not just kind of lost in the fray? So that's what I want, to make sure that there's a path once people get in, like someone else said, you're not forgotten, or you're not just sort of, you know, go and sit in the corner and do your work. We got to get past that, because that is basically what can happen a lot.
Thank you, Carol. Diarra.
Oh, so much, Roland. You know, as I listen to the talks, I like Carol I would say personally for me, I'll say, I was hoping for a more vigor in the conversations. As I listened to sort of what came out of group 3, I was really struck by hearing people speak about, you know, how long these issues have been. I mean, that's the overwhelming thing, is that like, this is something it's American. It's what we've known essentially one way or the other our entire lives, our entire careers. And people have very personal memories of stages in their development professionally where this question of how and what to do was there with them at whatever age. And then as I listen to the data that's come out of some of the other groups, or not so much the data, but there is a plan of attack. You know, things seem to be readily outlined about how to engage at a very broad capacity. And it has me struck as we get into this conversation with the sort of, I guess what I feel is the missing ingredient, the human component, the how do we do? When we hear a plan, when we hear a call, how do we get into the process of action? And it balances emotion, but it also is fundamental architecture, procedures, policies, man hours, you know, and that's the thing that I'll say, you know, as a, you know, this year I turned 46. In the same year, I will have been practicing in the field of architecture for 23 years. So this is my life. On the topic of discussion here, I am Black and I am in the architecture profession, and I am active and wanting people to be active along the lines of creating more architects of all colors and taking on work of all scale that is along the initiative that we're discussing. So, I think it takes a lot of us. So I'd love to hear from more people.
Let them jump in.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Michael. Thank you, Dion.
All right, let's hear from the participants.
Okay. Does anybody want to say anything that they hadn't had a chance to yet in response to what's been shared so far?
I'll talk.
Yeah, I do. Oh,
Okay.
I'll go. Ladies first.
Oh, I like it.
Can you take me off the
Anyway,
big screen, Roland?
Anyway, I'm going to give a shout out to Michael Willis because he's been around and has been a mentor to a lot of people I personally know. For some of us African Americans, we've always been the only people in the room, which is why I probably only know Michael on this call today. But in the room that I was in, group 3, I made a statistical comment about UC Berkeley. Of their 9,000 undergraduates for the fall, basically 316 were African American. So you can just figure out how many went to architecture school. Probably very few. Architecture is not a high-paying career, especially when you're young. So I can see probably if I'm a Black parent, which I am, I'm going to encourage my children to go to law school or an accountant or something that makes a lot more money. But more importantly, there are a lot of people who are missing from the conversation. Like, where's Allison Williams? Where is Chuck Higueras? Where's Ann Cervantes? Where's Fred Casada? These are the leaders in the sort of BIPOC that should be a part of the conversation, and we are not including them. They should be here. So I hope that you guys look at your AIA organization and the leadership for the organization, and also the leadership within each of the firms, because I just don't see enough of us represented. And I know that there are more of us because I happen to be friends with the majority of them. So anyway, I'll take my comment off the air.
So I was in that group also, group 3, and I went to Cal a long, long time ago, and Allison Williams was in my class, and I saw Charles. Charles is on this call somewhere.
He's here.
But what I was commenting on is I recently found Isabel Wilkerson's work on the caste system, comparing being Black in America to being part of a caste. And this caste is sort of assumed. You don't really realize it, but you make these cultural assumptions that of course it's this way because this is the way it's always been, and you don't even think. So that's why it's so hard for people to really understand. From when we hear about Black Lives Matter, we don't hear it the same way. We don't really quite understand. So we're struggling to understand. And certainly we need to be more diverse. I mean, that's for sure.
Thank you, John.
I wanted to chime in if I could. And I want to piggyback on a little bit of what Diarra touched on is we're at a very historic place and moment in time when we talk about the pandemic and what's going on in society. And he mentioned something that really touches me, and what I want us to really embrace is the human element of things. Yeah, we're talking about architecture and design, and we're talking about design and how it impacts how we live in our societies and our communities, but the human element of where we are in the world today, and how design can help structure that, and how design and being inclusive can help improve the quality of where we are. We witnessed some inhumane things that your eye is not even supposed to be able to process and understand. And I think that's where a lot of us are where we are today and where society is, because you're not supposed to witness that and be okay and be able to process. And us architects, we're very sensitive beings, because we go from a thought and take something to 2 dimensions, and then when it gets built, it's 3-dimensional, which affects how people live again and how you think. So it's cyclical, and we have this foresight that we have, but and we're responsible for a lot of the built environment and the interactions that we have and how we affect lives. But when you see lives not being taken seriously and not garnered or nurtured to improve, we talk about being in the room, we talk about being at the table, we talk about being in a conversation. As Black people, we haven't been included in that in so many arenas. We hear people, and what I don't want to get lost with this moment in time is the vigor that we need to really affect change. And as Diarra mentioned, how we roll our sleeves up and how we go to work. And what is that going to look like? What is it going to look like that's going to be different from the 60s? What is it going to look like that's going to be different from the 50s or 70s or what have you? I mean, we have different generations on here that have experienced different things. I often hear people talk about, when we're talking about, you know, I have 2 kids, twin kids that are going to be 5 in a month. And there's been generations of information passed on down to me that are just about survival. You know, I hear people talk about, you know, Black people have to talk. You have to talk with your son or your daughter about just survival, what to do if a cop pulls you over. And what I want people to understand is not just the talk. It's not like you have a one-time talk with your kids about survival and everything becomes okay, or you give them the manuscript or the or the pass. And the crazy thing about it, whatever you tell them, there's no guarantees for whatever you tell them, and it's an ongoing thing of parents and guardians having to remind their kids and the youth coming up of what to do and how to be cautious of survival, just because your life and circumstances aren't seen as equal as others. And so I say all of this to say that we have to do something. Our profession lends us to really affect change and to really have some foresight. We're thinkers. We're problem solvers. So what steps are we taking to solve these problems that people that practice with foresight? You know, what are we doing? How do we not lose momentum? How do we not lose steam with really things being at the forefront? It's unfortunate that we had to visualize these things that we've seen recently to really get this sort of attention. And being that we're in a pandemic, a lot of people are locked in, so you're forced to see it and process it. But you know, I just do not want to lose the steam, and I really want us to focus on the human element of things, because that's what it comes back to every time. That's what it comes back to. So you know, I just wanted to touch on that.
So thanks, Zeb.
Hey, Roland, I had my hand raised. I want to thank Mentorship for putting this program together. I know it's been a while since I've collaborated with you, but you know, I thank you for bringing this to a subject, and I think really this could be a series of conversations that continues. Adding or echoing on what Zeb just mentioned, thank you for those eloquent points. I think the way that we keep this conversation and momentum going is by getting involved with committees like Mentorship within the leadership of AIA. There's so many different committees that people can participate in. I am Latino. I'm serving on AIA San Francisco board. I think representation is important, not only for myself, not to empower myself, but to give those folks, the younger kids, a perspective, an opportunity to see that, yes, this can be you, and so much more. So Kim, thank you for bringing up, all of these folks, Charles Higueras, and Allison and Michael. It's great to see you here. It's part of a process that I think we all have to continue, and those of us who we haven't made it, but to continue to recruit and to serve as mentors for younger people that are part of our ethnicities, part of our communities. And I'll leave it at that.
I agree with you on that one, Dan, because we who are in architecture and have been in there for a while are actually should be role models to those who are just coming into the field. And the mentorship program has actually provided an excellent platform for that, like you said. And one thing I wanted to mention is something that was mentioned earlier about the benefits, something I think, I'm not sure who was mentioning it, that there's a benefit of having a diversity. Because, you probably remember Google had some sort of thing where they were accused of not hiring people that didn't look like them. So, and they did a study, evidently, a friend of mine, because I had another Zoom session with some other friends this weekend. And they said that the result of that study was that the more diverse an organization is, the more productive and profitable they become. So that's important to remember.
And Zeb, I just want to offer my benediction on your point, which is the demographics. The demographics of firm influences how we design. And so it's not just again, ticking the box, but it's looking at problems through the lens of this population, this diverse population, and not just design as an abstract idea. It's actually getting to the heart of what your eye sees, what comes to your hand, and goes down into the environments that we create for that population. So demographics will influence the design, I have no question.
Thank you, Michael. Was there somebody else who wanted to really speak?
Yes, I'd like to speak. Wendy Bertrand.
Yes, go ahead, Wendy.
I think we haven't mentioned the role of management. Management in architecture is a very weak area. Managers are not known for nurturing their employees all the way through from hire to leadership. Also, I have not heard the word women and men. Diverse women is part of diversity. We are almost 50% of the architects in San Francisco, and I have heard not much mentioned. There are Black women, Latino women, South Asian women. We are part of the diversity. So those are a couple things I wanted to bring out that I saw was missing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, anybody else that wants to speak? I agree with you, but depends on certain groups. There was a lot mentioned in those different groups, and I'm sure. Carol, I like to call on Carol to answer some of these questions because we had some long conversations on some of these issues that I think that you really spelled it out really quick, easily, well. Want to share some of those, Carol?
Not really sure where to start. I mean, Roland, we've known each other for almost 20 years now. And, a lot of the things that we talked about, it's one of those things where just like Zeb was talking about, there's so many things that are going on right now. They've gone on in our world for a long time. And just like John Sealander mentioned, Isabel Wilkerson's, books about the caste system. There's so many different facets to this, and it can be overwhelming to think about, how can we make this world a better place. And I think, yeah, there's so many places to start. I mean, I think I encourage everyone to just do some research, learn as much as you can, so that you can come from a place of not just empathy but understanding. If you think about the history in this country, and it can spin off to just so many different areas, but if you think about this country, we started with slavery 400 years ago, and then it went from slavery to Reconstruction to segregation, Jim Crow, redlining, and think about all these rules and laws and things that have been in place for centuries now, and now we are where we are. Now the challenge is that it's not just Black people who are having these challenges. I mean, look at our country right now, how divided we are, how I really feel like we're living in alternate universe right now. I can like person who's when we were in an office at work, person literally who sits next door to me, total opposite, who they vote for, or their beliefs in how people should be living in this world. There's just so many things that the in my opinion, this world, our country was actually started based off of free labor, and in order to continue that, you had to bring in racism. And I know that racism is part of human nature, but I feel like we're at a point where, like, how do we untangle ourselves from it? If you think about Black Lives Matter and the heightened awareness that everyone has now, I've been seeing the same police brutality and things like that for decades now. In a way, it's like a rolling script. It's like watching the credits of a film, and you just see these names rolling, and it just continues and continues. I mean, how do we stop this? How do we use architecture to actually make the world a better place? That's why I got into architecture, because I really felt like at 10 years old, I was drawing a 3-point perspective, and I thought to myself, I can design buildings to affect communities and make communities better. I mean, how do we do that? We can't keep on the way we are. This world, our country, is just not going to continue the way it is at this rate. We got to do something. I mean, that's I could just go on and on forever, but there's just so much that I think needs to happen.
When I spoke with Carol earlier, she was like going on, and it's just so much stuff that I hadn't heard before. I just saw we're about end. We've actually passed the time, but I see Ayumi Date wants to speak, so we'll let her speak for. You want to say something, Ayumi? You have to unmute yourself. Okay, go ahead, Ayumi.
I was in group 3 in Diario's
Yes.
that led, and I think Diario was very generous and in his conveyance of our conversation. And I just want to ask this question, because I don't want to push against progress and push against good intention, but I ask everybody, these words like that in our group, we were asked to look at the words and the order of words, and if the order makes a difference, and we're looking at words like justice, inclusion, equity, and diversity. And I just pose a question that we've been using those words forever, since I was in graduate school. And so my charge and question is, why don't we just mix it up and use better, more authentic words, I want to say. And would we push the conversation a little bit further? And so I suggested words like, let me just make sure, like white dominance, subjugation, entitlement, privilege. And I was wondering, I think those words to me have more meaning and challenge me than these nice words like justice, equity, inclusion, diversity, because we've been using those words forever and nothing has changed. And I wonder, like, and I sort of say, it's sort of like white patterns of behavior and language of entitlement. And so I just pose the question to all of you guys, isn't it time we just mix it up and call it for what it is?
Yes.
Yep.
In one word, yes. Wow, I love that.
You need words that would evoke the human element.
Yeah, did Sarah want to say something? I don't see her. No?
Before everyone goes, I just want to remind everyone we all have a responsibility, to be leaders, to be involved, to continue this conversation. And the way AIA SF Mentorship was trying to propose this is just the beginning of that conversation. Next year we do have, and we will be making groups. So please come and volunteer to be a mentor and continue these types of conversations throughout the year, mentoring people about how to have these conversations and leadership at their work, or just talking about any of the issues that are happening and being represented, being seen. And then Roland also, I think, brought up ACE mentorship, and I don't know if you want to talk about that briefly.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna need to probably give it back to Jing. She's gonna go through the calendar of what's coming up, because like you're saying, it's not the end of it. As depending on how much feedback we get, this could be continuing, but we do have some other sessions that are continuing, and I think it's important to take some steps. Like, talk is cheap, and but it's just almost like just absorbing, learning, and moving on from there. Jing, you want to come back, Jing?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. So thanks, Roland. Thanks, Marissa, for bringing this up. So this is just part of the discussion series that the mentorship committee is going to host for the rest of the year. I feel like this specific topic, given all that I've heard today, it deserves to have more chances, and I think it needs to have more opportunities to talk about and being on the table. So, but what we have planned it so far, we have a couple more different topics on different things that we think the mentorship committee could help, and they're coming up, one in September, 3 in October, and 1 in November. And then so this Thursday, we're gonna change the gear a little bit to something more casual with a social bingo game. So come and play with us. If you register, follow the AIA SF website and register in advance, you can get a bingo card, and then it starts at 5 o'clock. And then so I guess with that, thank you everyone. Thanks Roland for championing the event. Thanks to all the committee volunteers for helping, and thank you panelists, and thank you all the attendees for the great conversation that you guys carry. We'll be in touch with the social media and email, and hope to see you in next event.
Yeah, one other thing. I know that today's conversation was only an hour and a half, and it's way too little to cover everything that has to be. I mean, we try to limit it to 4 groups, and even that is too much to cover. So like Jing said, that it's a conversation we want to continue. And I really appreciate Dario for coming to speak with us, and Carol Kaur, and Michael Willis, and Rosa Sheng. because I know it takes a lot of energy to even talk about, and for the committee to generate this platform. And we're pleased that you could all make it, and we want to hear back from you guys in our next activities. And you just got to be involved, like Marissa was saying, little steps, baby steps. And by increasing that network, you can hopefully make some changes.
Roland, thank you for taking this on.
Yes,
You're
thanks,
welcome.
Roland.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Mhm.